evening and welcome to the Supervirus F1 Coronacast. My name's Rodney.
My name is Zach, and you've caught me completely by surprise with that one.
Well, why would I give you advance warning that I'm going to do that? That wouldn't make any sense. You got to have a bit of fun in these dire times, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, they are really dire times. I just am only kind of very, very recently back from Melbourne, and it felt like people were taking last train out of wherever they were going from. By the time I'd kind of got to Singapore and was out, everybody was like, I think that might have been one of the last planes leaving.
Yeah. Shut the doors. Zach got through to shut all the doors and stop everyone going everywhere.
It was insane though. When I got to Melbourne Airport and people were like going on their holidays to Phuket, and I was like, why are you going on holiday? Just stay home. Like, there's every chance you won't be like let into the country you're going to or back into your own one right away. It's incredible.
Bit of a problem. Well, yeah, if you haven't guessed already, it's going to be a bit of a different show because there was no race to talk about, and most of the news is bad news for everyone, especially if you're hoping to see a race sometime soon, because there ain't gonna be one.
No.
So I guess what we could talk about is our reaction to what happened here in Melbourne and the season ahead, if there will be a season. There probably will be, but we'll get into that. And then I got a super quiz later. We do have one thing that we can do, and then we might just brainstorm about what we're going to do until there's a race, because this is show business, baby, and the show must go on.
Exactly. Not just for the show's sake, but for like fighting our own boredom. Hopefully you're not that bored, listeners. Hopefully you've got a million other podcasts and video games and other books you can read and things you can increase, your relationship with yourself and others on. But we know that, I just got to have a phone call with Rod every couple of weeks, right? Otherwise I'll go insane.
I like to think that people who listen to this podcast believe that they're on a call with us, but they're just muted or something. That would be fun. We're on a conference call. We're all learning a lot about how to hold a conference call. It's really fun.
Oh, that's a good idea. We could do a live show or something and people could chat. Anyway, brainstorming later.
We could. But yeah, anyway, I guess as we said last time, you flew out here for the race and a wedding, but you flew out here to come to the race, and there was no race. And I was all excited. I had tickets to go on Saturday and Sunday, got some weekends mixed up and ended up having my daughter's birthday party on the Saturday. So whoops. Good parenting on my part, but poor planning, I'd have to say. You had that wedding on Saturday, so you couldn't go to qualifying anyway, but I was hoping to go. And then Sunday, no race. So we ended up having drinks with a bunch of friends in a bar. So that was a good way to spend Melbourne Grand Prix Sunday. But, I guess the big news was, that we came all this way, that all the teams came this way. Thursday went ahead. It's usually like an interview day, and then there's some, exhibition races and stuff, just entertainment on the track that's not F1 cars. And essentially, by Thursday, everyone was being asked to keep their distance, and it was very much, we don't think anyone's got it, but we are testing a couple of people. We'll know later what the situation is, and that was enough to get a few people particularly anxious, especially Lewis Hamilton, who made some very forthright comments in the driver's press conference saying, why the hell are we here? This is shocking. I'm surprised. And cash is king. Obviously, that's why we're here. It was all the money, 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 money. That comment was specifically addressed by Chase Carey and some of the other people who had to answer, why did we come here? Why did you set everything up? Put us all at risk of getting sick, only to cancel it. And then they said, well, to be fair, give them the right of reply here, as if this matters. They said if cash was king, then we would have still held the race. So that criticism doesn't quite hold water. But having said that, it does seem like the decision to call off the race happened Thursday night, which was when the first positive result came through. An engineer from McLaren or a staff member on the McLaren team tested positive. Pretty much everyone, it seems, knew at that point that the race wasn't going to go ahead. Teams came to the track the next day ready to pack up. And reportedly, Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Räikkönen had flown home. So the chances of a race happening were pretty much nil. But they did wait about 12 or 13 hours before actually announcing it, from the decision Thursday night to the announcement Friday morning. So that was the rough timeline of how things went out. I imagine you had a lot on your mind and you were doing a lot, Zach. But was there any reactions to any of those particular story points that you had?
Well, I mean, just my personal experience was that getting on the plane from Heathrow on Wednesday evening, which was kind of Thursday morning Melbourne time. The news was that the sports minister, Paul Little, who runs the Australian Grand Prix group or corporation or company, whatever they're called, was like, this race is happening. The whole thing's happening. Everybody's coming. Don't worry. Like, please come. And I was like, all right, well, that's good. And then, 13 hours later, I got off the plane in Singapore to transfer through, and I was kind of just refreshing news at that time, and I'm getting messages from people who are like, oh my god, do you see this McLaren news? Someone's got it. Like, what's going to happen? And I was like, well, let's see. Everybody's still saying that the race is going to happen, so it's not like I was going to turn around anyway. But it went from McLaren person's got it, but it's going to happen, and McLaren aren't racing, but everybody else is going to getting on a 7-hour plane from Singapore to Melbourne, getting off, having my parents meet me at the airport, and are like, the whole like F1 world is in like uproar. It was all the news that morning on the radio. Like, I was refreshing Twitter, obviously speaking to people like you and whatever F1 journalists we know as well, who were just like, we have no idea. And that was the thing that was most interesting and probably most poorly done by Formula One, is that they did no real stakeholder management at all. We have the FIA, we have the Victorian state government, who kind of are in charge of how and when these sports actually happen from a policy making standpoint and a governmental standpoint. Then we have the race promoter as well. Then we have the teams, and we have Formula One generally, like 5 big stakeholders, and one of those stakeholders, the teams, is actually 10 smaller stakeholders. Plus you have all of the fans, and you have all of the officials, and all of the food providers and food trucks and all of the kind of auxiliary stuff that goes around Formula One, and goes around the event at least. And no information was getting to any of those people as well. So officials were being told to turn up, marshals were being told to turn up. This was up until like 7:30 in the morning on Friday. Like, this thing was happening. And that was probably, well, that is, I think, the number one concern or number one problem that everybody's had with the way this was managed, is that there was no clear voice, either late Thursday or very early Friday morning, saying this is what's actually going to happen. And there's been lots of chat around whether each one of those stakeholders was kind of waiting on the other to call it off, whether that was for blame circumstance or like the positioning of blame or the leveling of blame, but also for insurance claims. If the government had called off sporting events, then it was easier for the race promoter and Formula One group to say, okay, well, we can call our insurance companies and say this wasn't our fault. Also, the government is involved in paying for some of Formula One being in Melbourne, much to the concern of a lot of Australian and Victorian and Melburnians as well, about how much the government should pay to have a sport like this. So they didn't want all of their money to be the money that they invest in the race to be lost. So if they could be seen to, if Formula One could call it off, then the government would have been able to get their money back. So it was just kind of almost like at a standstill. But one of the other things that really stood out to me was that it was the powerful teams or the strong teams in Formula One, be that Mercedes or Ferrari, were actually in a position to either pull their drivers out or pull their team out because they're somewhat self-sufficient in that they could afford maybe not to race in Melbourne. Whereas the smaller teams, their sponsorship deals are always kind of tricky. They swap sponsors more than Ferrari swaps Shell, or, Ferrari gets rid of Philip Morris or Mission Winnow or Marlboro, should we say. Those sponsorships aren't going to go away because they miss one race. So Sebastian Vettel can jump on a plane and fly home. Lewis and Hamilton can say something somewhat negative about the sport. I would argue truthfully about the sport, but, Mercedes can still kind of survive. Whereas if you're, Racing Point, or if you're, Williams, you kind of need these races to happen because you owe it to your sponsors and you don't need any of those complications. So it's incredibly finicky. It's amazing that that Formula One broadly doesn't have any processes at all for these kinds of things, let alone, whether it be natural disaster, massive. I know you can't really plan for a pandemic. I mean, you kind of can. All the films are there to show you why you should plan. As a culture, we're kind of prepped for this, seemingly, which is why I think maybe everybody's so worried and so anxious and does panic buying and those kinds of things. But
who would have thought that doomsday preppers were more prepared for this than the FIA?
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that was the major concern, is that the sport was totally unprepared. It was unprepared to make a call, and, to lead to kind of finish this rant off. I personally believe that the race should have been called off at least a week earlier, because other sports were being called off. The NBA called off really quickly. The Premier League was starting to make movements in the UK. European football was starting to shut down. And I say that quite ironically because this morning, my time and Thursday evening Melbourne time, Carlton Blues and Richmond Tigers are playing the first AFL game of the season at the MCG in front of no people, at the same time as it maybe looks like the groups of 100 or fewer people are going to be banned from congregating in that same city. So it just shows you how differentiated the messaging is, and how there's literally no planning available at all. But as I said, personally, I think Formula One should have called this race off well before people even left their countries or their factories or whatever to actually make their move to Melbourne.
I think it's obviously one of those things where the situation was changing extremely quickly. There's parts, I can see some of the relatable and positive elements from both sides. I would say people trying to equate what they did to the NBA with the situation holding a Formula One race. There's a bit of a difference in that the NBA is mostly pretty much only held in the US, and the corona situation in the US at the time was 10 times worse than here, and that's in a country that's 10 times more populated, so the opportunity for it to spread was much, much bigger. Plus, one of the players had actually tested positive in the NBA, and being a person-to-person contact sport, as opposed to Formula One, where the worst that you get is two cars crashing into each other. The drivers don't even make any contact. It's not a direct comparison, and that's not to excuse it, but that's to say that's that out there. The weekend before the Formula One, there was also a T20 Women's World Cup final, which attracted 85,000 people to the MCG. So I think this event was being held in an atmosphere of, we're watching this thing, but as much as we can, we're just going to continue with business as usual. Katy Perry had a concert here with 7,000 people attending probably 3 or 4 days before the race. So, earlier on the week. There were mixed signals, mixed signs everywhere, and it wasn't an easy situation to read. Having said that, like I say, just because the situation in Australia is a little bit better than some other countries, that doesn't mean that the people who are traveling here aren't coming from countries that have got lots of problems, aka the US and Italy in particular, coming through international airports, a bit of a petri dish for this kind of thing. Yeah. And just so many different people covering so many different territories, all coming together to be within close proximity. Something was always going to happen. And I think we said last time, the smallest little flu or gastro or whatever goes straight through the paddock. And if there was a case, then everyone was going to get it. So I kind of do agree that as soon as one person got it, it should have been called off. How do you predict that? I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want to be responsible. I wouldn't want to be the one responsible for making a, $300 million decision. No thanks. I'm good. I'm good without doing that pressure. But certainly you would think that there would be some kind of process in place for not necessarily a pandemic, but some kind of catastrophe, something that stops the race from happening. And that should trigger a series of decisions, and there should be, pecking order of, well, that thing happens, this thing kicks in, this governmental thing kicks in, this thing from the FIA kicks in, and then this race organizer thing kicks in, the blame lies with this people, or insurance covers that scenario, it doesn't cover this scenario, blah, blah, blah. But, the best we can probably hope for is that hopefully this is something that we're going to make. Hopefully that we get through this and we actually avoid the problem of before, of this race. Obviously, we've had a bit of a clearer message, and it's still not completely clear because the next couple of races are quote unquote postponed and not cancelled, but Melbourne is cancelled. There will not be a Melbourne Grand Prix this year. Will there be a Chinese Grand Prix? Boy, the FOM would love to have one. I just don't know that there will be one. We could perhaps drop a couple in where the summer break used to be, try and squeeze in another one somewhere, but the calendar is already so packed. This is a problem if one's already made for itself. There's just nowhere to put races, and there's nowhere to get stuff from one place to another. The logistics of it are already a nightmare. So adding the races taking them from the front end of the season and stuffing them in the back end just doesn't work. It's not really feasible. So, boy, it's a big old mess. The only thing that we can say is that there's going to be a few weeks of clarity. There's going to be maybe even a couple of months. We're probably even looking at Azerbaijan before we get a race. I know Monaco today have just announced the tyre selection so that if there is a race, we know what tyres they're going to be racing on. Round black ones, apparently. But, oh boy, don't laugh at that. If there is a Monaco race, that's probably the earliest we can hope for, but given the situation there, probably it's not going to happen. And elsewhere, because teams have to travel. It's not just as simple as how bad is the situation where the race is being held. So, yeah, we've got a time to take a breath. We've got a chance to just clear our heads, get our shit together. The downside of this, apart from no F1 racing, is that this is actually going to have an effect for the year. They need to have a bunch of races for there to be a season. Ross Brawn has said he's hopeful of having something like 17 races. I think that is pie in the sky. We're lucky to get a dozen, maybe 15 if we're really, really lucky, somewhere between there. And we'll probably get a year out of it. But I know that in Australia, for example, they're saying, hey, we are locking down our borders for 6 months. If you are not an Australian citizen, you can't come here. It's as simple as that. So, as much as people are sort of looking like, boy, hope in the next month or so, this is going to pass. You sort of see around the world, these are rolling 2-week lockdowns where no one can leave their house for 2 weeks. This is probably a 6-month problem. So, the logistics of it and the issue that it presents globally is just going to put the handbrake on things so hard that, yeah, we may not be racing until November, and then what's the point?
Yeah, I mean, that's we talk about like building processes, you know, to prevent this from happening, to like the way that Formula One handled it in Melbourne and ongoing. And a great opportunity to start building those processes is to understand the minimum requirements in order to get the sport running up, like back up and going again. And then you can reverse those and say, okay, well, would those same circumstances, if they were reversed, mean that we have to stop? And at this point, that's kind of the biggest problem, in that, to go back to that managing of stakeholders and how many different bodies and groups and organizations it takes to get one F1 race actually off the ground. The only reason it happens every single year is because, generally speaking, you just do what happened last year. You know, most of the races have been doing it for quite a long time and have each other to look at as reference point to say, okay, this is what you need to run an F1 race. You know, we need track, we need people, we need this much time to get prepared, all those kinds of things. But when a shutdown like this happens, all of that has to change. Like, it's not like they can just say, you know, at Baku, like, oh, okay, well, we'll just, as soon as, you know, we kind of feel comfortable again, we'll just run it. It's like, what do you even mean by that? Will you have the resources to do that? Will the teams that, like, will, you know, AlphaTauri even be able to leave the country to go to the race? Like, as you said, it's not like the F1 circus is sitting, you know, in a base somewhere in, you know, the north of England, all just sitting there waiting to move to another country. It's like, no, they've all dispersed again, back out to various different problem places with varying levels of degrees of critical exposure or not. This is not going to be as simple as like, oh yeah, we'll just test everybody and then we'll send them off to Baku and race. Like, I'm firmly in the camp that we won't see racing for at least a few months, at least. And then the idea of being able to shove even 10 races into this season, with maybe reduced levels of staffing, if anything, the infrastructure to run a race will become more complex. So if you would say that we're already almost a season of 20 to 22 races in a season was maybe as complex as racing could get, the idea that you'd be able to then compact that series into a smaller amount of time with fewer resources, with this amount of regulation happening globally, almost seems impossible. Let alone the fact that airlines will be closing down, businesses will be shuttering up shop. Like, we are in a very different kind of world for the next period. So I find it incredible that we were even talking about the idea that we'd be able to get a dozen races in, without maybe double stacking races at circuits, those kinds of things. I mean, I'd like to move the discussion now into more like, what do we think is going to happen, or how could Formula One solve this problem, and whether they should even have a championship this year. Because at this stage, as I said, I don't see it firmly happening, and maybe some of the drivers won't feel like they even want to necessarily go to every place that Formula One says they should go to. Contractually, they're kind of obligated to, but there's a lot of like personal risk involved in that as well. You know, they're races they want to race. It's the only thing they want to do. But, you know, they have families and lives outside of Formula One that they might not want to put at risk. So, there's a responsibility there for the sport to understand that and to lead from the front, maybe. So, you know, do you think, would you be interested in a shortened championship, or maybe 2020 becomes a super condensed super champion, like not the same kind of world championship thing, but maybe a shorter calendar with a different kind of reward, different point structures, those kinds of things?
Well, yeah, this is part of the problem of what kind of legacy is this year going to leave. If we run 10 races, the championship is kind of going to have an asterisk next to it, and this has implications for the development of the car. Often throughout a season, they'll run multiple development cycles, maybe 2 or 3 iterations of different front wings and engine tweaks and all the rest of it. That's not going to happen really if it's a much shortened season, especially when we're looking ahead and trying to build cars for 2021 to meet the new regulations. And that's an issue that's been boiling over today because, especially Ferrari are saying, we are shut down. We cannot develop next year's car. So we are now hamstrung. And the situation is maybe we should be delaying the introduction of the 2021 regulations and saying, let's develop this year's car, have the regulations stay the same from this year to next year, and then push any changes to 2022. So this sort of, savior rules that we've been waiting for to finally fix Formula One and make overtaking more of a possibility and all the rest of it. We've been waiting for years for these things and talking about them for years, and we're getting really excited about them being next year, but it might not be next year.
Yeah, that is... I mean, it's a valid concern. I mean, if Ferrari are concerned about not being able to develop their 2021 car, I'm sure other teams are like, you guys are already doing that? Like, we're just barely getting our 2020 car off the ground. So, I mean, a big part of me... Yeah, if you were going to do that, then I would almost be in favour of...
Are you going to say super season?
Yeah, I would almost say super season. Like, suspend the sport as in a traditional sense, and I suppose then it makes it just... the conversation really difficult for teams that are, had a budget that they were going to spend on this year's car. The incentive then would be to not spend on this year's car and just kind of go to the races and go, well, we'll try our best. Under they all talk to each other, the teams all talk to each other, and they'd all be a little bit like, well, are you going to compete really hard for this season, or are you just going to divert all of that to next year? All of your effort to next year when things actually settle down and they're predictable. These are big companies a lot of the time that actually sometimes even better well run, I would say, than Formula One itself or the FIA in most cases. And they would be thinking about the application of their resources and the return on those investments and saying, well, maybe it's a great opportunity to do well because people will be really gagging to watch Formula One regardless of what costume it appears in or what guise. So, if you do extra well in those kinds of circumstances, maybe there'll be more eyes on you and that'll count more for the brands and sponsors and the drivers and all that kind of stuff? Or will it just be kind of, if there was a super season or a condensed season, because people know it's worth kind of less, they just go, well, are these essentially exhibition matches and I'm not going to care, I'm not going to watch it as much. Maybe the die-hard fans will stay involved, but
no.
All of the people who have watched...
If we end up with only 5 or 6 races at the end of the year, I don't think we can say, well, these aren't worth any points. There's literally nothing, or we'll give you a trophy for the sake of it, but it won't go into the record books. It won't count as an official indoor season. That's a complete waste of time. I don't think the drivers would be interested in that. I don't think fans would be interested in that. And the problem is, if the fans don't go this year, they probably won't go next year because they'll have a sour taste in their mouths. And there's race organizers and race promoters who are like counting on bums in seats, right? So, as much as they don't want to not have a race, they don't want to have a shit race either, because that's probably just as bad. Long-term gain and, hang on, let me think about this. Short-term pain, long-term gain? Yeah, something like that. I think once we get down below 6, that's probably when I do actually flip and say, I am in favor of a super season, and say, whatever races we have this year, let's make them 100% count, and we'll carry over the points to next year and keep going and roll it all through. We'll have the season where the winner earns the most points. And the problem with that will be that Lewis Hamilton will have it won by, China next year. He'll have the championship decided. But, I think that's better than having, say, a 8 race championship and just saying, well, that was 2020, it sucked, but stick a fork in it, it's done, and points reset to 2021. Especially if the regulations don't change. Obviously, if the regulations still change, then that's off the cards for me.
Yeah, they're all options. That's the funny thing. We said that we sat down with a bunch of people on Sunday and had some drinks and some food.
We talked about all this stuff.
About all of this stuff. We should have just recorded that conversation. An really 8-hour-long podcast. But really, that was the thing, is that these are... Because this is such a unique circumstance, these are the conversations like the FIA and Formula One and Liberty Media and the teams are having. Everything is open to them except racing over the next couple of weeks. So at least. So they're all kind of like, well, what would you like to do? And how would you like to do it? I don't think it makes sense in a shortened season to have the same point structure because there's fewer opportunities to close that difference between 25 and 18 points. That's a big stretch. You win 3 races, you're suddenly 21 points up over your competitor that quickly. And
they might be races that favour your car for whatever reason, as opposed to the balance of a longer F1 season where you win some, you lose some.
Yeah, that's right. If anything, maybe we'll look back on the points changes and then we got to a more dominant part for Mercedes and Ferrari, and the gap kind of between the front runners and the middle of the pack was just exacerbated by the fact that wins and podium places were so much more than the rest of the places on the grid. I think that would need to be factored in as well. But, everything's up. Do you shorten, if you're going to have a shorter season, do we need to shorten the race weekends? So they're just Saturday and Sunday to reduce exposure, to reduce the cost of running the sport, to make it more manageable for teams and for race promoters and countries to run these races. So you just do like practice session Saturday morning, race qualifying Saturday afternoon, race Sunday, and call that a day. We're already this season, it's kind of really only Friday, Saturday, Sunday as far as race operations go, but there are some, whatever happens this year might also end up being a little bit of the blueprint for next season as well.
Well, one thing that's for sure is that we've got a bit of time on our hands now where we can think about all this stuff, keep an eye on the decisions that are being made and the conversations that are being had. We're still working out ourselves whether there's going to be, are we going to put out a podcast? Probably not every week, probably not every fortnight if there's no races, but we might put out one every now and again just to touch base and just see what is going on. We'll also think about a few other things that, if we're all sitting around under lockdown and you're sitting around under lockdown, maybe you want some stuff to listen to. Maybe you want us to refer to other media that you can consume and talk about it, like Drive to Survive or something. So we're working out that stuff, but we'll keep you informed. We'll keep you up to date on what we're going to do. But essentially, because there was no race, we've done pretty well talking for nearly 25 minutes about the race, the race that wasn't. I do have a super quiz prepared, Zach, and it'd be a shame to waste it. And I think it actually might be a bit of an uplifting one. So if you like, we can kick it home with a bit of a fun note, and then we'll leave it on a question mark at the end of see you whenever. What do you think?
That sounds lovely.
I'm going to hit ya with a super quiz.
We will accept a couple of questions. Should one only win one? Would one want to have won that one in round one?
Can you repeat the question?
So it's been a little while since we've done a quiz like this one, Zach, but I do have an audio-based quiz. This means you'll be hearing clues and expected to answer, hopefully correctly. And what would cheer everybody up right now more than the mix, the combination, the meeting of the minds that is Daniel Ricciardo and a bunch of school kids. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Right. So Renault, before the Melbourne Grand Prix, way back then, that thing that seemed like last year, that was only last week. Before the Melbourne Grand Prix, a promotional video from Renault featured Daniel Ricciardo going to a school and answering questions that school kids threw at him. And as you can imagine, pretty entertaining, but because there's questions and answers involved, old mate Rod sniffs the potential for ripping off that content as a quiz of his own. So what I'm going to do, to keep this interesting, I'm going to play you Daniel's answer. You'll hear Daniel's audio of him answering the question, but what I want you to do is tell me what the question was that the school kids asked him. How does that sound?
That sounds like an absolute delight.
Oof, hope you've got your brain switched to on.
My jet-lagged, addled brain, yeah.
Yes, exactly. All right, are you ready for... wait a second. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions here. Are you ready for question the first?
Yes, please.
Here we go.
I think because I've been doing it since I was so young, it feels normal for me.
Because I've been doing it since I was so young, it feels normal. Zach, what was the question?
Was it... was it eating breakfast? He's been doing it for so long, since he was so young. He feels normal to eat breakfast, even in these times of shutdowns and Formula One drivers having to be so thin. The answer is eating breakfast.
Could be eating breakfast, could be smiling. The correct answer is, do you feel claustrophobic inside your helmet?
Oh, of course. That's a good question.
So long, though, it feels good. He does say that his friends try on the helmets, and after a minute, they're like, ugh, I want to get out of here now, please. I think I would probably be like that as well.
Yeah,
are you ready for question the second?
Yes.
I don't know the actual answer, but it's over 100,000. It's a lot.
Over 100,000. It's a lot. Zach, what is he asking? What was he asked? What's the question?
I mean, how much he gets paid per lap, obviously. No, I think it is probably how many laps he's done. I reckon.
How many laps he's done? That's a good try. The correct answer is how many parts are on your car?
Oh,
Over 100,000 parts.
that feels like that feels like a super license quiz question. Really, how many parts are on your car? I mean, 100,000. Is that right? It feels like too many.
There's like the wheels. There's 4 of them. Then the steering wheel. That's 5.
Steering wheel, that's 1.
Then there's the bit that the wheels are all connected to. I guess that's
All the
the main
knobs.
car bit. And
All
the
the
knobs.
knob-
I forgot
all
the
the
knobs.
knobs. Gotta have
There's
the
about
knobs.
12 already. So
Yeah. What other bits? Engine. That's
Well,
1.
it's engine, of course, the engine. But yeah, 100,000 parts on an F1 car. Now you know. Okay, I'm going to hit you with another one. You ready? Listen close.
Have you ever heard of Dumb and Dumber?
What is Daniel referring to there? What has he been asked?
Oh, what's he been asked? What's his favourite film? That's got to be it. I mean, that seems like a good way to break the ice with Daniel between the kids and a 30-year-old man, a 6-year-old and a 30-year-old man. They'll know exactly what he's referring to. What's his favourite film?
He knows his audience. It could be, what does he call the Ferrari drivers? It could be, who are the FIA and FOM right now? But no, the correct answer, you got it, was what is your favourite film? What's your favourite film?
I mean, probably, it's like Daniel, it's definitely Dumb and Dumber. No, my favourite film... Oh, God, Rod, you really put me on the spot. I think it's Hackers.
Hackers.
Yeah.
Deep cut.
Yeah.
Good one. I always get that one and Scanners confused, but that's more on me than anything else.
Yeah, I don't think Scanners has Angelina Jolie in it. An early, short-haired Jolie.
Interesting, yeah. I have different ones. I think when I was really young, I would say Blues Brothers. When I got a bit older, I'd say Pulp Fiction. Get a bit older again, probably this really art house film called Schizopolis. But take your pick. I'm a prism. I'm not a singularity. I change my mind all the time. But yeah, there you go. Dumb and Dumber. Who would have thought that was his favourite film? I got 2 more left. Two bullets in the chamber. Here comes one at you right now.
I'll eat it. I'll definitely eat it.
Very short. I'll play it again. Hang on.
I'll eat it. I'll definitely eat it.
I'll eat it with his voice breaking. He'll definitely eat it.
I
Zach,
really
what's he
hope
talking
it was less of a question, more of like, and the children this morning spent the morning making a set of brownies that in the shape of your face, and have assembled it into a brownie cake. So we'd like you to, like Matilda style, eat the whole thing.
Oh boy.
But I'm guessing it was like, do you like broccoli?
He may like broccoli, especially if it's on a pizza, but the question was, do you ever eat pineapple on a pizza? And he answers, I will eat it, because he says he loves pizza. It's his favourite food. You can get pizza with broccoli on it, I'm assured.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the spirit of continually, because last time when I tried this went so well, hey, Zach, do you like pineapple on a pizza or what?
Yeah, delicious. Love it.
Yeah, me too. I don't get the haters. I like pineapple on a pizza. I'm a fan, especially ham and pineapple. Can't go wrong.
I mean, I wouldn't just... I'll eat it. I'll eat it.
I'll definitely eat it. Okay, I got one more for you. Ready?
Yeah.
I don't. I know one of the drivers does. It's a German driver, Sebastian Vettel.
Big clue there. I don't, but I know one of the other drivers does. A German driver named Sebastian Vettel.
No, one of the other drivers does. I mean, what are the main differences between Sebastian Vettel and Daniel Ricciardo?
Barely any. Nothing comes to mind.
Has children. Sebastian's won a world championship, whereas Daniel probably never will. One's driven for Ferrari, where Daniel probably won't either.
True.
Although maybe he will. Could be a seat swap next year. This is a tough one. This is a real tough one. Does he?
Last question's usually the toughest.
Yeah, I mean, is it that Sebastian Vettel sleeps with his helmet on? Maybe that's it. Does anybody sleep with their helmet on?
One of the early questions, do you get claustrophobic in your helmet? Daniel kind of jokes about, wearing it all the time, going down to the shops, just chilling out, walking down the street. I had to cut it out because he kept saying 100 times, I wear my helmet. I was like, stop saying it so I can use you as a question. But does he wear his helmet to sleep? No, that's not the question. The question was, do you name your car? And his answer, no, I don't. Sebastian Vettel, German driver,
Quite famously, he does.
Famously also subject of one of our old super quizzes. So listen to all 150 plus episodes of our show looking for that quiz, because it's a good one.
It's a good one.
It's early on. It's in the first 30 or so.
When the quizzes were hot and there were
tried
lots of
hard.
topics.
Yeah.
There was lots of easy, like, fun F1 things to be like, this is fun and easy. It's really hard to put together a quiz these days, but you've outdone yourself this time.
Oh, well, look, I mean, like I say, when the opportunity to do something a little different comes up, I take it. Sebastian Vettel names his car. What did he name this year's car? Can't friggin' remember. No idea. It was something boring, and I don't really care anymore.
Yeah, that's a long name.
School kids care about stuff like that.
Yeah, do you reckon the kids actually wrote these questions, or did the teachers write them and the kids ask them?
They may have had a little bit of priming to be like, here's some things about some F1 drivers. Maybe ask those. One of the things I didn't put in was someone asked the kid, who is your least favorite driver? What do you think Daniel said?
Daniel, did he say Max Verstappen? Because even though they're best mates.
He was more diplomatic in a roundabout
we all
sort of
love
way.
each other.
He said, I don't like Lewis Hamilton, but it's not because he's not a good guy. It's because he's winning and I want to win. So that's the guy I want to beat. That's, pretty good. The best answer you could give to a kid, really. That's the that's the level you want.
Just as a bit of fun, just a little quick thing on Lewis Hamilton. Not technically a full F1 dream, but more of an F1 cameo, a dream F1 cameo.
Okay.
The other night, obviously I've been... only went to Australia for like a few days, so my sleeping has been all weird and like had some real almost like fever dreams. But I was dreaming about like all sports being shut down and travel being shut down, and I bumped into I walked past like a press conference, and Lewis Hamilton had been asked on a whim, what's with your weird comments the other day, and he said I just said what I meant, and like I speak from the heart. And for some reason, I walked past him at the table at this press conference and be like, I really appreciated you speaking the truth like that. I'd love to hear more of that stuff like that. He's like, well, anytime. I was like, I actually do an F1 podcast. He's like, email my people and I'll come on. And then I walked away and I was like, who would I email? I don't have anybody's details.
Love that deflection. Like, not going to happen.
Yeah, that's never going to happen. Anyway, gee whiz. Daniel Ricciardo, I can imagine that they it was good that they primed the questions or prepped the questions so that what happened to Nico Hülkenberg when he did that event at the Microsoft store 2 seasons ago, where the kids were all asking like, and how many races have you won? And he was like, none yet.
Lots when I was 15.
Yeah.
Not so many lately. I think they did also ask Daniel, have you won any races? But he was like, yeah, a bunch.
Of course, mate.
I've won a bunch. It's not
awesome.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, he nailed it. So anyway, we talked about the fiasco in Melbourne. We've done a super quiz. That's a battle that we can offer you, dear listeners, but we are thinking of you all, so we want you all to stay safe. Please do whatever the science is telling you should be doing to keep yourself safe, and then I guess obey the government the rest of the time. Now's not the time to be a hero or a rebel. Don't get yourself arrested or in trouble. Just obey the rules for a little bit longer, and you can go back to your normal rebel-rousing self. We know this about our listeners. They're all rabble-rousers. So, look, just look after yourself and each other, and be kind to each other, because it's going to be a tough couple of months, I think. And you'll be hearing from us shortly, either on the Twitters, on the Facebooks. You can email us if you're really desperate for some contact, and we'll respond to you there. But we'll try and put together some kind of a show for you in the coming months and weeks, and can't say exactly right now what that'll be, but we'll let you know at the time.
Don't overstress yourselves. Exactly. Don't overburden yourselves. Don't watch the news for every minute of every day. These are the things that breed anxiety. Don't over stockpile. There are some people, I'm sure, less fortunate than you who could, who could use some of that toilet paper or some of those canned tomatoes or whatever. Try not to panic, and wash your hands, man. 20 seconds.
Yeah.
All the time. Wash your hands.
Yeah, just that old trick. Just sing the Formula One theme song about a third of it, and then when you're about a third of the way through, that's when you can stop washing. Everyone knows the
How
words.
How does that theme go, Rod? It's like, let's sing it together.
Tequila.
I love Formula One just as much as you.
We have fun on this show.
We have fun.
Well, listen. Thanks for listening. We'll be back when we can with whatever we can scrap together. Until we can do that, my name has been Rodney.
My name has been Zach.
And we'll talk to you on the other side of this thing.
This thing. Till then, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, yeah.